Okay, now to continue our discussion about electric vehicles, let's bring in our panel. With us in our studio, Marc Morano. He is the executive editor and chief correspondent for ClimateDepot.com. Joining us from Nashville, Tennessee, Tyson Jominy. He's the vice president of data and analytics consulting at J.D. Power. And Tu Le is the managing director at Sino Auto Insights. He joins us from the U.S. car capital of Detroit. Thanks all of you for joining. Marc, I want to start with you. Let's talk about where we're going as a nation, as a global entity. We heard a lot of talk recently, including the World Economic Forum, about moving away from fossil fuels. From an environmental standpoint, are electric cars the future? Do you think that's the way to go?
Well, actually, there have been many studies showing that electric cars are more harmful when it comes to emissions. If your concern is carbon dioxide emissions for climate change, then electric cars may not be the way to go because of the amount of carbon dioxide produced during the process, also the mining necessary. Now, 80% of the world's energy is still on on fossil fuels. So how are these cars being recharged? By coal, by oil, by gas. So it's kind of a, ideologically and environmentally, they don't make much sense. Now, technologically, they may make some sense in the future.
Tu Le, I saw you kind of looking at this response. Tell me what your thoughts are. Do you think that there's some weight to what Marc said, or is it mistaken?
Well, I think if you look at it from the standpoint of time frames, in the short term, yes, a lot of the electric vehicles, electricity is coming from coal, but once we get more longer term into the future, we're going to look at solar, we're going to look at alternate ways of gathering that electricity for the electric vehicles. So I think he has a point to a point. I think in the next 15, 20 years, as we get the energy storage becomes a bit more mainstream, and then the solar and alternate forms of energy become more mainstream, I think that becomes less relevant.
Tyson, and a lot of new cars are out there touting the acceleration and better batteries, but also some real names in the muscle industry. A Mustang is out there, and Hummer had a commercial at this year's Super Bowl. Where is that leading us, and what are your thoughts?
Well, it's almost like we're in generation 2 of the mindset for EVs. That generation 1 approach was, let's target the market with really cheap econo cars, and maybe consumers want that. And I think it's been pretty clear that we, at least in the United States, did not want that. And the Tesla model, it was right in this regard, is that it's a high-tech product. It has a lot of excitement. They can be quite sexy. So the EV kind of version 2.0 that we're in is really moving towards this faster, more high-performance part of what EVs can do. So it's a different approach that we're starting right now.
Tu Le, let's talk about China, because more than half the EV vehicles on the road right now are in China. Let's talk about the market there. Why is it leading? And I thought there was a pretty thoughtful article from the president of GM talking about until they can really conquer a few things, including refueling quickly, battery power, affordability. It's just kind of a pipe dream. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think that there's immediate challenges due to the trade war, due to the slowdown in the market. But in 2008, the Chinese government made a point to become the #1 battery manufacturer and the #1 EV manufacturer. And I think they're still on track to do that. In December, they revised their goals for 2025 to from 20% of all vehicles sold in China being NEVs, so that includes battery electric as well as plug-in hybrids, and upgraded that to 25%. So they doubled down actually on their ambitions towards EVs. And in the short term, there are these hiccups, especially now with the coronavirus. So 2020 might be an anomaly, but the trend is still going up. And what we're finding is that, or what we'll find is that the GMs and the Chryslers and the Fords will have to play ball, because Volkswagen, they're setting the pace right now with the amount of investment they're making and the production capacity that they're switching over to EVs in China alone. So it'll be interesting to see, because I think the U.S. auto firms are begrudgingly moving towards EVs, but you've seen much more excitement in the newer products.
I just want to add that the problem we have here is there's always hope for the future. They always, in the 70s, solar and wind are just around the corner. And I think the problem here with EVs is, and again, I don't ever want to be against any kind of technology because you never know what kind of breakthroughs. Look what happened in the U.S. with fracking. We had the International Energy Agency had their projections wildly off on U.S. carbon dioxide emissions because they couldn't predict the fracking revolution. So my point here is, when the marketing of electric cars, the reason they didn't take off in America is President Obama announced a multi-billion-dollar initiative to put 1 million electric cars on the road. People see the electric car as a government-issued eat your vegetable, and we're going to take your steak away, and the steak being the SUV, to force you to eat to eat your vegetable, which is the electric car. So I think Americans are going to have a huge problem with marketing of electric cars because they see it as being imposed upon them. It's a long road, particularly in America. And all the rah-rah optimism can't obscure those facts.
Okay, Tyson, I see you back there kind of getting ready to jump in. Thule, I'll get to you in just 1 second. But
okay,
I guess in one way, Marc does make a point that the cost is out there. It's going to be much more expensive than a traditional internal combustible engine vehicle. And the government has offered both here, China, other nations, incentives for people to buy EVs. But clearly, you're not buying what Marc is saying.
Well, no, I think Marc and I are probably arriving at the same conclusion. I just have a slightly less political and otherwise take on it. Americans have more or less rejected plug-ins in general, I mean, including plug-in hybrid vehicles. Combined market share for plug-ins plus EVs is 2.4%. And we've already had our iPhone moment, right? The Model 3 is the most anticipated vehicle certainly of my lifetime. And what did it do? Well, it did very well for Tesla, but in terms of the overall market, I mean, it pushed it from 1 to 2.
Yeah.
And so I'm with Marc because EVs are not taking the market by storm. And the real challenge is that the reality is we have 125 new plug-in models coming to market over the next 5 years. So it's not a pipe dream. It's not some far-off thing. We're going to have these models. Now, whether or not they come to the U.S., that remains to be seen because we have shown that we really are not truly interested in what is available today, really outside of Model 3. But, in general, I mean, a 2% market share, it's almost nothing.
Thule, and I think that Tyson makes a good point. In the United States, people don't like change. They like what works. How do you convince people that you should look at an EV? You should consider buying an electric car?
Well, I think we need to look at it, again, the world is flat now, so what happens in China affects the United States. So it's going to be very difficult for the OEMs to invest in dual powertrains, an ICE and an EV. So what we're going to see is the products just start transferring over to the EV platform. And once we see more vehicles that are available, so that the customers have more choices, I think then it's going to be easier to market because I would agree with Marc that it's a tremendous job right now because part of marketing is educating. And so I think the U.S. public is not educated very well on the EVs and the range and reducing that range anxiety because there still is some. But the reality is 90% of the people that drive cars don't drive it more than 50 or 60 miles in one day. So the range anxiety is more a psychological thing than a real thing. And what we'll see is over the next 3, 4, 5 years with Volkswagen introducing 20, 30 cars globally, as well as GM by 2023, I think they're going to introduce 10 or 15 electric vehicles or hybrids. So what we'll see is a shift in the market because they're going to be force-fed these EVs because China's dictating it, and they're not going to want to invest. The OEMs aren't going to want to invest in dual powertrains for 5, 6, 7 years. They just can't afford it.
Well, Marc, in China, there are some 400 companies trying to break into the EV market. Clearly, there's not enough to sustain that. A lot of these companies are going to go by the wayside. Do you see a point in the future where other nations really embrace this because they've been told it's effective?
I don't know they'll do it because they've been told, but it's got to make sense. For instance, if you go back, the VW Bug became an icon in America. The Ford Escort was a #1 selling compact car. You have two things here, 3 things that are in favor of battery. A, you have technological advancements which could come at any time that'll get rid of any of the current issues, #1. #2, you have the high end. You have the Elon Musk, you have LeBron James doing the ad in the Super Bowl for the new GMC Hummer. So you have that, it makes it cool appeal. And then these celebrities don't keep the car long enough for the battery to ever fail, and they don't care about the maintenance record. These are an it factor, cool car. On the flip side of that, once you sell that to the public, once you can have a sort of a cheap model Chinese car or from some other company to come out and it makes sense and it's got a decent range and it's not, the cost isn't prohibitive, suddenly you would have a mass appeal of a car. But it's not going to come from Elon Musk. Elon Musk is paving the way, but it's going to require a cheap, affordable car, almost like the Model T of electrics. And I haven't seen the Model T of electrics hit yet.
Tyson, I want to ask you, the forecast for the adoption of EVs has always been more glowing than the actual end. In fact, in 2010, the then Nissan CEO, Carlos Ghosn, said that electric vehicles would represent 10% of the sales by 2020. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, you really have to pencil in big volumes to make the EV business cases work. And so we saw a lot of that. In the market today, sales of cars are about 27% overall. Whereas EV sales, it's actually 87% of EVs are cars. So what haven't we done? Why doesn't it work? Again, back to my first point, which is we launched first econo boxes that were hatchbacks. What do Americans hate more than anything besides change? We hate hatchbacks. And that's what we came out with. That was our great idea for EVs. What we're missing is the heart of the market, which is that 75%-ish that's trucks and SUVs. Now that is what's coming. That's this Gen 2, which is the Hummer EV and the Mustang SUV and Rivian and their trucks and SUVs. That's the next gen. So we haven't even really scratched the surface of the market and what consumers want with the body types that EVs offer.
And to piggyback off of that statement, Tesla's first two vehicles, the Model S and the Model X, they were over $100,000 in the United States, over $150,000 in China. And now their last three vehicles, the Model 3, the Model Y, and the Cybertruck, they're all under $50,000. So Tesla is moving towards mass market as well, although the price point is still a little bit high, I think, in the United States and in China for the meat of the market. They are moving towards that goal. So it's going to increase their volume substantially. And so in order for them to become a real player, they need to grow their volume, and that's what they're trying to do.
I think one of the biggest issues here right now, though, currently in America, is the political context. It's because you have the state of Washington just this week trying to mandate, more electric cars on the road, and then doing other things to make, the internal combustion engine more expensive to drive. This creates resentment, and it also puts this hope on the technological breakthroughs. This is coming, that's coming, the next generation. Which, again, as you pointed out in 2010, they had all these projections. Obama thought there'd be 1 million electric cars on the road after spending billions. He failed spectacularly. So I'm not against technology, but let's not mandate something that's not there yet and ban something that has been proven, the internal combustion engine. That's why this should not be a battle.
Lee, but let's get back to the three things we talked about: range, ability to refuel, and the cost of the vehicle. If subsidies continue to go away, who is going to be able to afford an EV right now?
Well, I think what you're going to see is when the GMs and the Fords and the FCAs and the Nissans come out with more products, you're going to see more affordable EVs. So I think we're just trying to create economies of scale, right? I think we would all agree that the number of products that are available in the EV sector in the United States and China is still pretty limited. And once the traditional automakers have more than 50% of their products being EVs, what we'll see is that we'll be reminded that they're very good at marketing, right? Because let's not forget, over 100 years they've been doing this, and they've convinced us as consumers that we should buy a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 product and use it 5% of the time. To me, it's more of a timing thing that we're arguing than yes or no, a binary.
Mark, hang on, because we're running out of time, and I do want to get one last question to you. Let's talk about the consumer appetite for EVs, because in China, and I've been to Beijing a lot, and in the winter, bad summer months, the smog is very bad. Yes. 73% of the customers in China intend on buying an electric vehicle. In the United States, those who say they would buy it is 14%. Why the disparity?
Of the 1.1 billion cars on the road, 1/10% are electric vehicles by the end of 2019. Those are the figures I saw in October. So the spectacular, scope of what they're talking about we need to do to ramp these up. Just repeat that, 0.1% of 1.1 billion cars are electric vehicles. That's the scope. And everyone's like, oh, they're the future, they're gonna take over, they're gonna have this market share, this, and cherry picking. No, this is a huge, now in terms of China, maybe because they believe that, their smog will, disappear in the cities if they switch to an electric car. May or may not be true. China is going through an industrial revolution which has many factors. I don't know that an electric car would solve that, and they're going to have to wait about 10, 20 more years. They're where the United States was in 1880. Their air quality will improve, but it's going to take a while because it's such a rapid industrialization that's almost unavoidable right now.
Truly, your take on that?
Well, for those people that have been to China, I'm sure you can appreciate the speed at which things happen.
Yes.
With regard to the coronavirus, they were able to put 2 hospitals up within days, right? So they went literally from zero, and I'm making that, from very minimal EVs in 2008 to 1.4 million in 2018. So I think as more products, again, it's about product and it's about educating the consumer and creating many choices, right? Because when we talk about Tesla, we're still only dealing with tens of thousands of cars being sold in China. So although they're a feel-good story from the standpoint of a marketing and an impact standpoint, it's still the domestic automakers in China that are creating that volume. And that's going to continue to happen because there's going to be more of them on the road, more new products on the road.
Well, great. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all for your time. A lot to chew on there. We greatly appreciate it. And that does it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Calebs in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Hello everybody, I'm Anand Naidu. If you enjoy the thoughtful, engaged discussions you see on The Heat, you may also want to subscribe to our podcast. It's appropriately titled The Heat. Twice a week we take a deep dive on world headlines, talking to experts, journalists and others. It's a fresh, focused and intimate look at the issues that matter most. Whether it's the Hong Kong riots, the latest Middle East conflict or US politics, the Heat podcast gives the clear context needed to understand both what's going on and why. And what's best, we come to you. Whether you're at home or on the go, you can find the Heat podcast just about anywhere podcasts are found. Just search the Heat CGTN. Have a listen today and subscribe. Thanks.